which I find is one of those things that a lot of people have no idea about, which is kind of understandable. I mean, if you think about it, most of our society is concentrated on Europe because most Americans, and really North Americans in general, have descent from European roots, or at least our culture does. And so we can focus there. But it's a mistake to discount the rest of the world. And I like the reason this chapter is where it is, because we can kind of see the other side of the Crusades. You know, we spent some time talking about religious wars. And if you think about it, that's really what the Protestant Reformation is going to be. It's about religion. Religion plays a major role in changing society during this time, but so does science. And that's the other kind of half of the Renaissance right there. But we've seen the Christian side of things, so let's look to the Muslim side of things. And the Ottoman Empire is going to be this little tiny area of lands controlled by a family that's going to expand due to the Crusades. And that's one of the reasons why they emerged as one of the world empires of the Renaissance era, the 16th century, and so on and so forth. So the Ottoman Empire was originally created by a dude named Osman. The reason we call it Ottoman is because the English translated the Turkish Osman with a T, Ottoman. And so the Ottoman Empire is actually talking about all the followers, all of the people following Osman first. Who had a son named Orhan, a son named Osman, and so on and so forth. And it was originally founded as a place of fight against Christians. These were Ghazi warriors, religious warriors fighting for Islam. The Ghazi were the Muslims' answer to the Crusaders. And this begs a question, because we didn't really talk overly much about the Crusades itself. Crusaders in Europe were made up of a lot of different peoples. And the Pope encouraged people to take up the cause of the Crusader and promised that anyone who fought in the Crusades and died would earn a one-way ticket to heaven. Any sin you had committed up to this point would be forgiven. So you had folks who had, done some pretty terrible things, tempted to take this up as a way of atoning for their sins. It was also a pretty lucrative deal as well, because you could potentially win land in the Holy Lands. After the First Crusade, the Christians actually ended up conquering parts of Jerusalem and set up this collection of states that were Christian, known as the Crusader states. And so this is a really popular option for second sons of noble houses, because in the grand scheme of things, if you were the firstborn son, you inherited everything. They didn't split up in Christian society. So if you were a second son, you would inherit nothing. So generally speaking, second sons would become a soldier and hope that they could win some land somewhere in the military service. If you had a third son, they went to the church. So that's the general theme of things. As far as the Muslims were concerned, though, they took this one step farther, and they literally operated on a system of pillage. You see, a lot of these Ghazi came from tribal societies. And in a tribal society, there's a big emphasis on raiding. Warfare in tribal societies tends to be not as brutal, because, or not as bloody, I mean to say, because it's more costly. But this also means that they're kind of used to just taking stuff. The Vikings did the same thing. And so one of the ways that you would pay Crusaders, or pay Ghazi specifically, was by letting them loot any place they took over. So if the Ghazi ended up taking over a city, they just would steal stuff. So you could not only guarantee your soul a place in heaven for fighting for the faith, but you could also make it out pretty rich, too, if you did well. So it was a big incentive to do all these different types of things. And Osman was able to gather a lot of followers. Now, one thing to understand about Turks is the early Turks were nomads. They were these type of raiders, and they didn't follow people because they had to. They followed people because they were the best at what they did. Essentially, it worked like this. If you were a competent leader, and you could basically guarantee your soldiers a chance to raid and make money, then they would follow you, no problem. But if you stopped failing to do that, if you didn't hold up your end of the bargain, they just leave you, flat out. So the type of leaders we have arriving out here tend to be just the best of the best of the best. It's just kind of the first meritocracy, if you will. So Osman was able to use this and use his status as a Ghazi to expand his empire into Christian lands. He officially kind of became an empire when he captured the city of Adrianople, which is going to become the Turkish capital. Now, later, that capital is going to move to Istanbul, which was Constantinople. And that's going to be years down the line, 1400s. So anyways, the empire continued to grow rapidly, and it really grew the most under Dugan Bayezid. He was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire during this rapid expansion period. Now, let's look at that word for a second, Sultan. You guys have ever watched the Disney Aladdin? You know, Sultan, right? You guys know like Jasmine's father, he's this kind of like big bumbling dude. He's like, oh, my daughter must get married. He's totally clueless about everything. Like, there's that one time, like, once Jafar is dealt with, and like, oh, I love you, keep bumping into him. Like, it was like, you know, who's going to marry my daughter now? And he's like, oh, I love you so much. He's totally clueless to everything, right? So, remember what I just told you about the Turks only following a guy who's competent and like does all this kind of stuff, right? Now imagine that we're talking about that dude from Aladdin. Is that a sultan? There's no way that dude's leading anybody, right? I mean, the sultan in Aladdin is just, it's a caricature, really. Not these kind of fierce people who, you know, led their action, and were actually politically savvy individuals as well. But, it's a Disney movie, it's all right. Bayezid Yildirim. Kind of an interesting thing about that name, Yildirim, is his name was Osman Bayezid, because he was of the Osman dynasty. But Yildirim is a nickname that was given to him. One of the things we learned about Turks is because they followed whoever they wanted to, when they wanted to, they basically had no sympathies in terms of like having to respect who was in charge. So they nicknamed their leaders in whatever they thought was their most obvious traits. This could be good or it could be bad. For instance, there was a sultan named Selim II, whose nickname basically in Turkish meant Selim the Yellow. And the reason for that was because he had jaundice. You guys know jaundice? It's basically when your liver doesn't function and doesn't take all the toxins out, so you start turning yellow. Yeah. Now that can happen for a lot of reasons. You know, for instance, if you're undergoing a chemotherapy, babies get a lot because of, you know, being new and things getting underway. The reason he had it was because he was a raging alcoholic. He actually ended up dying by getting so drunk he fell down the stairs and broke his neck. So, I mean, needless to say, they didn't really respect him, which then begs the question, why was he so calm? We'll get to that. Yildirim means the lightning bolt. And the reason for that has to do with the way he waged war. You see, instead of taking food, yes, we don't laugh at that word, think of it from a pirate standpoint, you know, money taken whenever you conquer an area, he demanded soldiers, Christian soldiers, to fight for him, and he would use it as army. The problem, though, is Christians were unwilling to fight other Christians, but that's okay, because Bayezid has a plan. He's not just going to expand his empire to the Christian lands, he's going to attack other Muslims who are his rivals for power, other Turks and folks like that, including even eventually the folks who control Mecca and Medina. And he's going to use his Christians for that. And he's going to continue using the Ghazi as the Christians. So if you actually watch like a map of this campaign militarily. Like 1 second he's attacking in the south, attacking the Muslims down there, and he bounces up north and he's attacking Christians. He's like a pinball going back and forth. It's the lightning, it's fast, moving around. He ends up being kind of messy in the. I say messy. We actually don't know what happened to him. But he ended up going up against another warlord who was arguably the craziest person who ever lived. He was a dude named Amir Timur. Amir means military commander, so it's Commander Timur. His nickname was Timur Lane, or Timur the Lane. He's lame. What happened was Turks were intimate with horses. Like horse culture was huge in their society. They would learn to ride horseback like as soon as they could sit in the saddle. So you have like it's sort of like Mongolia. You see pictures of Mongolians living on the plains in central and northern Mongolia. There's like kids who are like 4 or 5 riding a horse, things like that. It's like so if he fell off the horse when he was a kid and broke his leg, he never healed properly, so he always had limp. It's lame. And he was another warlord. And the thing about Emir Timur is he was a great military leader. He was terrible as an administrator. You can tell this because, unlike, say, Genghis Khan, who, when he took over a territory, or Genghis Khan, as it is, he kept it. It became part of his empire. Now, in the case of Tamerlane, whenever he took over an area, they would frequently rebel against him. And so the way he responded to rebels was to march his troops into that city and then have every one of his soldiers behead 2 people at random. Just decapitate 2 people and bury their heads. And then he would stack their heads in a giant pillar or a pyramid outside the town gates to remind everybody who was in charge. Yeah.
What did you say was called Timur
So I said Amir Timur, AmirTemur. He's in your book, I think it's TIMUR. Same name, just I'm going into more detail. So the other thing he liked to do was build what was called whaling pillars. And that's where he gets a bunch of people and stacks of like Lincoln logs to make its tower and ends up cementing them together while they're still alive so that they can die a slow, agonizing death of hunger and starvation, or dehydration. I actually heard rumor, and I don't know how true this is, but allegedly, sometimes he would make certain that they were given food and water so that they would live as long as possible and actually die of gangrene. But either way, it's still pretty beastly, cruel death. Needless to say, and that was the objective of equally. And if you use enough cruelty, people will cross you. Except that didn't work. It made people even more desperate to break free. Now, as I said, he was a brilliant military commander, and he was really nervous of this growing Turkish, specifically this growing Ottoman presence on his border. And so he found out that Bayezid was using these Christian soldiers to fight Muslims. He said, that's my justification for war. So he ended up marching off the war because of what he was doing to the poor Muslims, and ended up defeating Bayezid at the Battle of Ankara. Now here's what's kind of interesting. We don't know what happened to Bayezid after the battle. He didn't die in battle, that's for sure. Timur took him captured, took him in prison. And so some stories say that Tamerlane ended up basically stripping him and ended up carrying him around in a giant bird cage. And would like be like, here's my pet. And it seemed like he throw crackers at him like he's a parrot. Other stories say that he was tortured to death. Still, weirdly enough, another story says Bayezid ended up living as basically a close friend of Timur for a while. And allegedly the reason behind that was because of Tamerlane's favorite pastime, his favorite hobby. He really, really, really liked the game of chess. Tamerlane actually loved the game of chess so much, he named his son Shahrukh, which in Persian is Byzantine rook, two chess pieces. There's a lot of interesting names in this area of the world out there. People who are leaders and things like that. And also a lot of nicknames. For instance, the guy who set up the first Turkish Empire, the one that the Ottomans kind of came from, the Safavids. Oh no, not Safavids, it's different. The Seljuk Turks. Was a dude named Al-Arslan. You guys know Aslan? Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe Chronicles of Narnia? Lion. Okay, Al-Arslan means hero lion. His name is Hero Lion. It's a great name. I think it's funny because Aslan Arslan is Turkish for lion. There's a lot of Turkish stuff I've noticed in that book series. Here's a sort of romanticized painting of Tamerlane meeting the defeated Bayezid. So, the next sultan on the list we're going to talk about is Mehmed. His nickname is the Conqueror, right? Because he defeated the city of Istanbul, which is now Constantinople, and ended up bringing it into the Ottoman Empire. Now, the reason behind that, why that's significant, is that the city had always been sort of something the Turks wanted but couldn't have. The city walls around Constantinople, I forget the exact measurements, but I believe there's something like 8 feet thick. It's unbelievably thick stone walls. And there was really no way that the Turks could get at it, because the Turkish main military tactic was to use horse cavalry with bows and arrows. That doesn't really defeat a wall very easily. So basically what happened is everyone who tried to take Constantinople failed. So the Turks just essentially encircled it and left it there. So the great Byzantine Empire, which had been this massive part of the Roman Empire, was basically reduced to one city. And so, Mehmed changes all that. How does he do that? Well, he does something kind of clever. He kind of takes the idea Bayezid has and runs with it. He establishes the Devshir, Turkish word. And it is, I'm going to try putting it on here. I don't know what this is going to do, so bear with me. Oh, it's not working. Never mind. But the word, I'll write up on this board, and those of you guys at home, I'm spelling it out for you. It is Devshirme. Devshirme. The Devshirme was a tax. Specifically, the word means child tax, as a tax on children. What it meant is that every town and every village under the control of the Ottoman Empire had to give to the Sultan a certain number of children every year who would become his personal slaves. So these slaves were Christian, for the most part, that were part of this tax and would be collected up by these troops moving around and would be brought back to a city to be tested, both physically and mentally. They were forced to convert to Islam and would be trained to become the Sultan's private army. Which, think about that for a second. Slave army. Doesn't that sound like a terrible idea? Like, imagine for a second if we had given in the American South a bunch of slaves guns. What do you think the slaves would have done with them? They're probably trying to get their freedom, yeah? But here's the thing of it is, this new army that he is setting up is going to be treated incredibly well. One of the things you have to understand is slavery in the Ottoman Empire isn't quite the same thing as slavery in the rest of the world. For instance, one of the slaves of the Sultan Suleiman was a guy named Enver. But no, that's not his name. I forget his name, because they're terrible names. Somebody can tell you, I'll think about it later. But basically, this dude ended up becoming the Grand Vizier, which is the highest position of power in the Ottoman Empire other than the Sultan. So basically, because he was so competent and because he was so good at what he did, he ended up becoming this incredibly powerful person who had slaves of his own, which is kind of weird to think about. Because we think of like a slave doesn't own any property, it's all their masters. That's not necessarily how it works in the Ottoman Empire. So being a slave wasn't necessarily a mark of bad things on you. You just were associated with whoever was your master. So if your master had a good reputation, so did you, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a different worldview that we have to wrap our heads around to really grasp what's going to happen. So, in truth, if you were selected as part of this dev chairman, you could end up with a very bright future. For instance, imagine if you were the son of a farmer in some podunk town in the middle of Anatolia, who basically your entire future is going to be a farmer. That's the best you can hope for. But you're selected as part of the dev chairman, and now who knows? If you're smart and strong and are talented enough, you can end up as Grand Vizier. You don't know. So there are stories of mothers following behind these slave wagon trains saying, "You forgot my child, take him with you," because they wanted this opportunity for their child. This new military was named the New Troops, Janissaries. And they are going to scare the hell out of Europeans for the next 300 years. They are an elite troop. They use a lot of new types of weaponry. You see, one thing that's kind of interesting is the Ottoman Empire controlled the Silk Road. And so they had some of the best steel in the world from Damascus that they were going to be mixing with weaponry or weaponized usage of black powder that was from China to create the first real modern firearms. Because technically China had firearms for years, but they basically looked like little cannons that you would hold in your hand. They were using a whole new system of technology in order to build these guns, these muskets that were going to be utilized in order to really effectively fight armored troops. Because guns completely negate armor. If you think about it, it's able to punch through it. But the thing that really, really is effective is the Janissaries' use of cannons. They built some of the best, biggest cannons of that age. In fact, they had this one cannon that was nicknamed literally Big Bird that was able to shatter the walls of Constantinople. And the thing is, as they were bringing it in to bear to fight against Constantinople, people could see it. And it just gave us, we're doomed. They just knew what doom was upon. The Janissaries were very good psychological warfare. They ended up using drums and music in order to announce their presence on the battlefield. There's stories of armies that were arrayed against the Ottomans, and the Janissaries would start up their music and they would surrender. We're not fighting. So we're not going to get an elite group of warriors. Eventually, that's going to go downhill, though. We'll get to that later. So, the next guy we're talking about is Selim I. He ended up conquering the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and also by answering a problem that had faced many sultans up to this point. Who is going to be the next sultan? Understand, sultan means commander. It means literally military leader. That's what the title means. And so essentially, you have to select who's the greatest military leader. So generally, it's going to be one of the sons of the sultan, because let's face it, they've got all the advantages. But usually, who that's going to be, no way to really decide that is a civil war. And so basically, the method operandi is for the sultan to place his favored son, when he wants to be sultan, in a position close to the capital city. And then essentially, when the sultan dies, all the sons try to race to the capital city, and whoever gets there first with their army and takes control of the city is able to declare themselves sultan, and basically they can kill off all their brothers, or they can, work out deals, things like that. Usually ends up in a lot of debt, a lot of debt. And so Salim thinks this is unacceptable because, when a civil war happens, you have all these people dying, farming's disrupted, taxes are disrupted. Usually that's a good time for your enemies to invade you, so you have to fight off their army and probably lose some territory in the process. It's just unacceptable. So Salim comes up with a solution. And just so you know, his nickname is the I said the Grim Reaper. He had this reputation for basically Machiavelli. He's not going to think too hard about what the right thing is to do. And so what he ends up doing is he ends up murdering all of his sons, except for one. Saul. Now, what's weird about this is you'd think that the church, the Muslim faith would be totally against that, right? That they would be condemning it. Well, they didn't because one, he's Salim, you don't do that. And two, it actually makes some kind of sense from a certain point of view. Think of it this way. If you can guarantee that whenever the leader dies, we're going to have thousands dead because of civil war, doesn't it make more sense to kill 6 than save the thousands? It's the devil's arithmetic, right? I can save thousands of lives by killing these 6 people. It's the right thing to do. Never mind they're your children, right? This is how it was decided. So Salim does this, and his son that he selects, Suleiman, becomes the next leader. And Suleiman is groomed for this position from a very young age. Suleiman ends up becoming arguably the greatest sultan ever. We know him in the West by the nickname the Magnificent. They call him Suleiman Magnificent. He had such a great court, he did so many wonderful things. The Turks call him Kanuni, which means the lawgiver. The reason is, Ottoman law was a mess up until this point. It basically was hard to understand who exactly paid who for what, all this stuff. So basically, he rewrote all of the laws into one that made sense. That's called recodifying. They recodified the law. That's a big deal. It's not as glorious sounding as he conquered this great city. It was amazing. But think about this. If you were living in the empire, what would you rather have? A story about this great conquest that happened, or all the taxes now make sense to you? I mean, let's be honest. Stuff that's boring is usually what benefits people the most. Another way of thinking about this, I don't know if you guys have ever had to really drive much downtown in Spaghetti Junction, things like that, but how much traffic and how much of a mess it is, yeah? And so we've got these bridges going up and everything's kind of trying to streamline this, things like that. So right now, the construction is making life miserable, especially trying to come across the bridge. Like I've been late twice so far this year because the traffic has kept me on the road for so long. Like literally, one day took me 3 hours to drive a distance that normally takes me 10 minutes. So, needless to say, people like me are like, oh, I'm so upset, it's freaking traffic, things like this. It's all your fault, construction. But here's the thing is, once that construction's done, how much better is it going to be? When you think about it, no one thanks the politician who does road construction work, even though we need it, because without it, the roads collapse and we have bridges falling apart, People like to look at the stuff that's dramatic, not what actually benefits the most people. So Suleiman, kind of a big deal for a lot of different reasons. Here's the main reasons that he was important. First, as I said, he codified the law. Secondly, this was the renaissance of the Ottoman Empire. Under his reign, we had works of art that were being created en masse. We had new technologies. I mean, basically, the Ottoman Empire was way ahead of Europe in a lot of different places. And what's interesting is there's a few instances in Turkish history where they very nearly conquered Europe. Like, basically, there was like one bastion that was standing between them and Europe, and if that bastion had fallen, we would probably be speaking Turkish. but they didn't. Things happened to cause it from happening. And it's just kind of a funny old thing to see how that works out. But the other thing he did, and this is again one of these things that maybe not so interesting to talk about, but it's kind of important to the Turks, is he improved the economy. You know, it was a great time to be alive. And there's a lot of things that I think that are part of our culture that have its traditions in the Turkish culture that we don't really think about. How do you guys like sherbet? Like orange sherbet? Yeah, like ice cream? It's pretty outstanding, yeah? That's Turkish. Because it's actually from a drink called sherbet, which is a form of like a fruity drink. And actually it's consumed all across the Middle Eastern world. What it actually is it's a type of fruit admixture that you can drink, and it's kind of pleasant and everything like that. But it's really best whenever it's served with an over fresh snow. And so it has this like kind of nice fluffy texture. That's where sherbet came from. It's really, really super rich with this with snow, because buying snow is really, really expensive. And so you have this sort of thing. Sherbet was something that is really popular throughout most Middle Eastern cultures. And it's actually one of the things that's consumed during Ramadan. So it's just one of those. It's just one of those kind of holdovers and things that's kind of neat, I think. But ultimately, there's going to be a lot of trade going on between Europe and really the Ottomans. They're all different places. Sugar is going to be a big deal as well because of this. Now, Ottoman military successes initially relied on the Turkish beys. The beys were sort of the nobles, sort of like medieval knights for the Turks, heavy cavalry. Later on, you started going on with the soldiers that were slaves, the janissary, or otherwise known as janissaries. For instance, on the board I have it spelled like so, and that's, I believe, how your book has it spelled. I could be wrong on that. And then this is the actual Turkish word for it. And then, of course, it was created through the Dutch German attack we mentioned. And as I said, they also used gunpowder weapons such as muskets and cannons. This is an example of a janissary. And again, one of the things you'll notice is these muskets they're carrying, as well as these kind of interesting looking hats. These very colorful uniforms that they were wearing. One thing that I think is also interesting is you notice these sabers, these curved swords. The Turkish-style saber is going to be a major influence in European military design years later on. For instance, I think you guys have seen this before. You haven't. But this is a U.S. officer's saber, and you can more or less see the same sort of design. Yeah, holding that kind of like that, you can kind of see it's basically the same thing. Yeah. The Turkish beys. Okay. Bey is sort of like a noble. That's it means lord essentially, and the reason for relying on them was these elite troops. Again, just like medieval knights. Did we talk about medieval knights? I don't remember if we even did that. Okay. All right. So basically, being a knight takes a lot of training, a lot of work to be able to fight properly. For instance, armor such as that up there is really good at deflecting a lot of armor. I mean, if you think about it, there's no way I can really pierce that with a bladed weapon. I mean, you take something like this spearhead, and we try to punch it through, and that wasn't exactly a soft hit, and that basically was put like a small dagger. I mean, and to be perfectly blunt, I could probably pierce this armor if I had a horse to drive it into that, but that's the only way I'm piercing that armor. You know, it's not the easiest thing to do, and this is specifically designed to do that. If I really want to work in on someone with this, I'm going to try to work a bladed object in between these blades and shove it in through, like, say, the armpit, into the heart, or something like that. There's a lot of techniques that can try to do that, but it's not easy when they're trying to kill you right back. See what I'm saying? There's a lot of techniques using a sword for that same purpose. You know, again, like I said, you can kind of try to come in through here. You know, you can try to come in through the top. But generally what happens if you see knights fighting each other, they'll do this. Actually, it's a technique kind of like this. You pinch the edge of the sword. The reason is it makes it a lot easier to maneuver the tip of this blade. It's called absolute. And so, for instance, if I can, say, wiggle my sword around to the side and pin his on my cleon, I can step in and through the eye socket. Or if I have him at a disadvantage, that pushes sword out of the way of mine, I can actually bring my hand up like so and jam the edge of this into his helmet, either stunning him, or if I can work in this eye slot, I can kill him like that. So learning how to do that takes a lot of time and money. And so that's why knights were granted land in exchange for their service. Now the other side of that coin is most of your army isn't going to be knights because it's just too expensive to have a lot of them. They're European legion troops. So you get them on horseback so they can get where they need to go, and then you send them after your normal common man-at-arms. You might have some chainmail. I'll tell you what, you get that sword and you ram it into the chainmail with a horse on it, you're gonna run through it. And most folks don't even have that much armor. You know, you have knights just plowing through people and just destroying armies. And then something like these knights show up. Now, if you're a knight, you're gonna like, these guys can't hurt me, no big deal. You'll charge them, boom, blast you right off your horse, you're dead. The Janissaries were devastated because guns replace everything else. The Europeans are going to learn this lesson. They're going to use it really well for their own advantage. But the Ottomans kind of start this arms race, and the Europeans are going to respond. This shows, I believe that's a Suleiman, but I could be wrong on that. But specifically, you have all these different groups around, and you can kind of see some of the fashions that were popular. One thing I think is kind of interesting. Oh, this is the Dutch Shearman, that's right. This is the child tax. But I was going to say, one thing I think is kind of interesting is the type of clothing that the Ottomans wore. These coats they're wearing, women wore pretty much the same thing. It wasn't terribly different, except in some cut. These are the weapons I was talking about, these muskets. And I think it's kind of neat how actually very pretty. I mean, they're really highly decorated. But these flintlocks originally were actually, I believe they were matchlocks. They show how they were guided. These are bays, and behind these lines of cannon, and then this janissary who's talking to them. You get kind of an idea of what it looks like. These are the walls of Constantinople that are still standing. That's what the city looked like back then. And again, you can imagine these giant walls were something that were pretty intimidating for a bunch of guys on horseback, but they ended up defeating it also through pure stubbornness. For instance, the Dardanelles, which is this waterway that comes into this waterway, the way that the city defenders kept the Ottomans from bringing in ships to use cannons on ship was to drag this giant forged chain across the bay so ships couldn't get into the water at all. The Turks saw that and said, no, we can't get over it. What did they do? They got their soldiers to go break the ship and pick it up. Like these giant ships, right? These wooden ships. They picked them up, put a bunch of dudes under it, walked it over the land to the other side of the chain, and put it back. It's kind of like, well, that did not work. They were stubborn, they did what they needed to do, and they won. But anyways, so that's kind of where we're stopping for today. But again, I'll show you this, because I got the other ones in. This is a cavalry saber. And the thing about one of these is if you're fighting someone on a one-to-one on the ground, a straight blade is actually a lot easier to use. These type of blades were specifically designed for being used on horseback. Basically, you can imagine riding on a horse and coming along and sweeping down like so, or even coming down. Usually you'll see guys doing something like this, and on an upwards arc. And the reason behind that is when this blade hits, right, a straight sword is probably going to stick, and then as I'm coming past it, you can imagine a flat blade, you notice how my hand's putting pressure on the blade. What's likely to happen with as much force as a horse will tilt and do is it's going to rip the sword out of my hands. And now I don't have a sword. But because this is curved, what happens is I'm drawing it along and pushing it. A great example of this in day-to-day, if you've ever taken a steak knife to steak, how do you cut it? You go like that, yeah? That's because you're cutting it with the blade, not trying to push through it, right? Take care, guys. This will be online by the end of the day. So.